Welcome to the SRP 3.0 tutorial series. In this series of short videos, we'll explore different features of SRP 3.0. In this particular video, we'll look at the Reports menu, and in specific, we'll look at the general reports listed in the Reports menu. You get to the Reports menu off of the main menu. It's a tab after the Cycles menu. Click on that, and this screen will come up. And by default, the first time you come into the Reports menu, General Reports will be listed. You'll notice that General Reports, the name itself, is a drop-down, and you can click on it, and you have a total of three types of reports. We have our General Reports, we have Institute Reports, and we have Custom Reports. In this video, we'll concentrate on the General Reports. The next thing you'll notice is when you're in either the General Reports or the Institute Reports menu, there's two columns of reports listed. The left column will have summary reports, which will probably only have a single line for you with summarized information in it, and the right column will generally have lists reports. In order to look at some of the basic features of the reports, let's look at a membership list. So when you're looking at a report, regardless of what type it is, we have three buttons across the top. The first button closes the report, so it allows us to get back to the previous screen or the next tab that we have open. The next button is the Export Data report. If you click on that, you can export the data of this report that's visually represented on the screen into an Excel spreadsheet. You can then take that Excel spreadsheet, download it to your local machine, or if you need to email it to a core member or someone else to collaborate with, you can attach it to an email. The next button is Printable Report. So the list that you see on the screen contains the data of the report, but it's formatted for display on the screen. It has a scroll bar across the side, and you can scroll up and down. You can filter this information by clicking on the filter buttons. But up here, if you want to actually print this in a nice looking printable report, you can click on Printable Report. It will render a report for you. And once you have the report rendered, if you're attaching to the server environment from a Macintosh computer and you have a printer defined on your Mac, then you can click on the print button here and the report will actually print out on your local printer. If you're connecting to the server environment from a PC or a Windows computer, you cannot click on the print button. You'll have to click on the export and export the report to a PDF, and then you can take that PDF to bring it down to your local PC or attach it to an email and send it off to someone. So that's the three top buttons. The next items to look at are the report name. You'll notice the report name itself is a drop-down menu. Apologize. So the report name is a drop-down menu box, and if we select that, we'll see the same reports that we saw on the main Reports tab. So this is a quicker way to switch between the reports if you're doing some analysis and you want to switch back and forth between the reports. You'll see me choose both ways, and you'll see that eventually this is a faster way to switch between the reports. After the report name, we have one or many filter options. So in this particular report, the membership report, the report itself, we're looking at the latest data. So this is the data in our data set. This is the list of membership as of right now. It's a live representation of our membership list. But let's assume you want to answer a question of what did our membership look like at the beginning of this year, you know. So we could come in here and say, you know, as of last election, this is what our membership looked like. And it may be different, it may not be different. But the two filters on this particular report allow you to look at the data as of right now, or look at the data as of a particular date in time. For whatever reason, you may want to do that. We'll see that different reports will have different filter options across the top. So if we go back to our reports menu, we looked at the membership list. Let's look at the next list option on here, which is the local spiritual assemblies. So if we click on the local spiritual assemblies, this report will list all of the local spiritual assemblies, all the LSAs we have in our current view. So if you are looking at a cluster level information, this is going to show all the LSAs in that particular cluster. If you were looking at it and if your data set had a regional representation, you could see this information for all the LSAs in that region. Or actually drill down. It wouldn't make much difference to select a single locality because then you'd only see one line. That's why it actually switched to a different report for us. So let's go back to the report menu. So we looked at the two listing types, the local spiritual assemblies and the membership list. Let's come to the summary reports on the left-hand side. Let's select the first one, locality type. We select locality type, and let me bring this back up to the cluster level. Let's go back here. We're at the cluster level now and select locality type. So looking at the cluster level and the locality types report, we see that I only have a single cluster in my data set. So it's showing me a single line with how the localities within our cluster or this particular cluster are have progressed, so to speak. We have on the left-hand side, it starts with localities without believers. Then you go into isolated centers, which is one believer in a locality. Then if a locality has several believers, but less than 9 adults, and has been recognized as a group, then it'll be listed in this column. If they have more than 9 but have yet to establish a local spiritual assembly, they'll be listed in this column. Then finally, if they have actually organized and elected a local spiritual assembly and that assembly has been recognized, they'll be listed in this column. The filter menu on this particular report allows us to look at this report either by cluster or by locality. So we can switch it to a locality view and you can see a visual representation of how your localities fall within these different buckets. Or if you have multiple, again, if you have multiple clusters in your data set, you may want to look at this at the cluster level and get a single line view for each cluster. So let's go look at the cluster milestones. Similar to the locality types report, the cluster milestones allows you to look at how this cluster or how your cluster is progressing along the program of growth continuum. We have on the left-hand side a column for program of growth has emerged. Then we have an intensive program of growth has been established. Then an intensive program of growth embracing large numbers. And similarly to the last report that we looked at, you can see this as a single line for each cluster, and you can view it by cluster, or I can say, show me this information by milestone. And if I had multiple clusters in my data set, then you would see a column in each of the clusters that have achieved that level of programs of growth would be listed in those columns. So it may be a different view that you may want to look at. So looking at the next item or the list, the report type, we have Baha'i population. So the Baha'i population will show all of the registered Baha'is in our dataset for this particular cluster that we're looking at. And the filter button allows us to look at this at the locality level as well. So here's all the localities in this cluster and their Baha'i population and how that is distributed amongst the different age groups. Or if you had, again, multiple clusters in your data set, you could view this information across multiple clusters. Let's look at the community development next. Community development is interesting because it shows you the level of growth or the level of intensity of the community building effort within a community or a cluster. So here we have the devotional meetings, the home visits, whether 19-day feasts are being held in the community, and whether holy days are being observed, and lastly, whether the local Baha'i Fund has been established. So once again, we're looking at this information at the cluster level, so we get one line because my data set only has a single cluster. If you're looking at a data set that had a regional view or multiple clusters in it, you would see the multiple clusters listed, and your total line at the bottom would give you the aggregate information. But since we only have a single line, or we're looking at this at the cluster level, I can switch this to locality and see each of the localities listed within the data set that I'm looking at. And that might be beneficial because I'm trying to find perhaps the communities that have yet to establish home visits. So that might be something interesting. And that might be something you might want to do, like we could click on the filter, we can come into the filter button here and say, show me all of them that have a 0 filter. And that is all the communities within our cluster that have yet to establish home visits as a practice. So let's look at the next menu item. Actually, the next two menu items are somewhat related. We have cluster summary, and then we have cluster growth profile. So let's look at the cluster growth profile first, because then the cluster summary will be easier to understand. If we select the cluster growth profile, this view might be new for some of you, or some of you that have seen the cluster growth profile, this may be very familiar. Basically, a cluster growth profile allows you to take a view of certain snapshots in time and the level of activity within those snapshots for this particular cluster. Generally, the cluster growth profile will have some summary information, which is, identifies the locality or the geographic location of the cluster that you're looking at, what level of milestone has it passed, identifies the coordinators that it may be attached to that particular cluster, some geographic location, approximate size, as well as population, and a little bit of information about the local spiritual assemblies within the cluster, as well as the board members. So that's the header information that goes on the cluster growth profile. The next thing is the cluster growth profile generally has 5 tables listed, and each of those tables will have at most 4 snapshots. 4 cycles of activity are represented on a cluster growth profile, so you can view what is going on from cycle to cycle within the cluster growth profile. So the reason I wanted to look at the cluster growth profile first is because if we look at the cluster summary, you'll see that it's very similar in design. You have your header block of information, and then you have your 5 tables, but each of the tables only has 1 row of information. And if you notice, that 1 row of information, if we look at the date as of, is today's date when I'm recording this video. So the cluster summary report gives you the same view of information that the cluster growth profile does, but this is the data as of it is today, not how it was at a particular point in time, which was the last 4 cycles. Another thing to note is when you're looking at your cluster summary, you can actually generate this summary at different levels of geographic location. What I mean by that is I'm looking at the summary information, but if I come up to my location filter and select a particular locality within my cluster, I will get a locality summary that will give me the information for a particular locality. And similarly, if I come and select a focused neighborhood within a locality, I can actually get this report at a focused neighborhood level. So this is a great way to look at your focused neighborhood, see the level of activity within a focused neighborhood, or come in here and generate a locality summary and print this and send this off to your individual locations or your secretaries as you, from a core team perspective, try to establish a dialogue and a rapport with your local spiritual assemblies. This is one of those reports that's wonderful to share with your local spiritual assemblies, because this will show them the level of activity within their community that you're aware of. And they may come back and say, you know, we have some other activities, core activities that weren't listed on that report you sent me. So let me send you those things. So this is a wonderful report to keep in mind when you're collaborating with your local spiritual assemblies. Another report that is good to have in mind when you're collaborating with a local spiritual assembly is actually the membership report. So if I come here and select the membership list and go to my filter and select a locality, then this becomes a membership list. It's switching lists on me. Hold on. So let me do latest report, membership list, latest report, and it's for a particular city. So this becomes a list, then I can send off to this particular locality and say, you know, these are the individuals we are aware of in your locality. Are you aware of any other individuals in your locality that aren't listed here? And you can collaborate back and forth. I've seen this used from a perspective of printing this out, sending it to an assembly, and having them mark all the ones that have moved out, and then list all the individuals that should be added to the list. They're known Baha'is within the community that should be added. So that concludes our look at the general reports, the summary reports, as well as the list reports on the report menu. Thank you for watching this video. Look for more videos in this series on our YouTube channel.